Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I want to welcome you to our virtual series event, Hello Again, the Appeal of a Book Series. This panel is sponsored by My Queer Sapphic. Thank you again to My Queer Sapphic for sponsoring this panel. Let's get started. We hope that you enjoy this event, and I'm going to hand it over to today's moderator, Karin Kallmaker.
Hello, everybody. I think I've got my tech working correctly. As Christelle said, I'm Karin Kallmaker. If you don't know me, I've written a lot of books since the days of Naiad Press and with Bella Books and my own independent imprint, Romance and Chocolate Ink. However, series are not my wheelhouse. So like a lot of you, I have pen and pencil out and I'm taking notes, and I'm going to watch this on YouTube again so I can learn everything you're about to learn from our fabulous panels. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce everybody. Quick click there. We're going to go in alphabetical order by first name. It made sense to me at the time. Anne McMan is the author of 12 novels and 2 collections of short stories. She is a 2-time Lambda Literary Award winner, an 11-time winner of the Golden Crown Literary Society Awards, a 5-time IPPY medalist, a Forward Review's Indie medalist, and a recipient of the Alice B. Medal for Body of Work. She is also an essayist and contributor to magazines Crime Reads and the Gay and Lesbian Review and the literary journal Jonathan. She divides her time between Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Grand Isle, Vermont. Wave, Anne. Anna Pulley is the author of the best-selling Love Where You Work series, erotica, and this is one of my favorite titles of all time, the lesbian sex haiku book with cats, which Tegan and Sarah said is an adorable, hilarious way to start the day. Cheryl Strayed called a must-read, and actress Jennifer Tilly, I can't do the voice, sorry, said was thoroughly charming. She writes a weekly sex and dating advice column for the Chicago Tribune and has been published in the New Yorker Magazine, Mother Jones, Washington Post, San Francisco Magazine. The issues she contributed to won a National Magazine Award, Vice, Salon, BuzzFeed, and many others. She was also named a top LGBTQ writer on Medium. Her writing was quoted in Esther Perel's recent book, The State of Affairs. She's been a repeat guest on Dan Savage's podcast, Savage Love, on Daniel M. Lavery's Dear Prudence podcast, and on the popular 99% Invisible podcast. Next, we have Jay. Jay is the author of 23 award-winning sapphic romances, including the Oregon series, which is an overarching series that should be read in order, and the Hollywood series, which is a loosely connected series that can be read in any order. She lives and brags about pretty frequently the sunniest city in Germany, near the French and Swiss borders. She used to be a psychologist, but gave up her day job to write Happily Ever Afters, and is celebrating 10 years as a full-time writer next month. As far as she's concerned, it's the best job in the world. And she's not lying. She's not lying. Next is Casey Luck, having just finished writing her 21st novel. Casey Luck is a best-selling sapphic fiction author who loves everything about books. She's the author of multiple series which are all over the genre map, with whether it's spec fic series about an apocalyptic world, a contemporary romance series about friends at a local bar, or an erotica series with a club filled with lesbian billionaires. She takes great pleasure in creating complex plots for her characters. Although currently only writing part-time, Casey aspires to trade in that day job for a career as a full-time author very soon. If nothing else, so she can continue to stay home and cater to her 3 furry feline companions. And we all know cats have standards, and you got to meet them, or they pay you. They make you suffer for it. And last, never least, Melissa Brayden is a multi-award winning author of 24 contemporary romance novels, and she loves her job. She's a dedicated fan of all kissing scenes, enjoys gallivanting on TikTok, and spends most of her time chasing two short humans around her home. She's a dedicated storyteller on both the page and stage, with a master's degree in theatrical directing and past studies with the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon and Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London. Though writing romance is now her full-time job, much of it is spent on donuts, wine, coffee, and staring off into space. And on that last item, all you writers out there, remind friends, family that staring off into space is work. It's part of our job. So say hello to all your panelists. They are amazing collection of talent, expertise, and just outright competence. And we're going to start off our panel today with a really essential discussion of the definitions of different kinds of series, because that kind of folds into every decision that you're going to make when you write a series, from how do you set up from the beginning to marketing at the end, and then continuing, et cetera. So our first question, and I'm going to start with, our first definition is, what is an overarching series? And Melissa Brayden is going to answer that question.
Yeah, you're on.
Muted, Melissa.
I knew one day that was going to happen to me. Well, the overarching series, it's also known as the epic series, or I've actually heard it called the sequential series, because these are the books that you have to read in order. The plot continues from book to book, and it wouldn't really make sense to you to pick up a book in the middle of the series and be able to read it on its own. You would need to know what came first. Often these are the types of books where one problem is solved in the book, but the large overarching plot is not solved until the end of the series. And so those have to go together. Off the top of my head, a series that is sequential like that is Ali Valley's Devil series. I did not know this when I read book one, and there was a cliffhanger, and I was so angry because I had to wait for book two to come in the mail. So that's something to keep in mind if you're picking up a series, is to know what you're getting into and whether you can grab one in the middle or not. With sequential, you cannot.
Okay. Our next type of series has several names. It's called loosely connected. It's also called standalone. And Casey Luck is going to explain what that is.
Well, it's pretty much the opposite of what Melissa just described. It is when you can pick up any book at any point in the series, and you can read it and not feel like you've missed anything. I don't read series that way. I'm pretty much one who has to read it from the beginning to the end. But for those who don't like to do that, I don't know who you are, but if you do like to do that, you can absolutely pick one up in the middle and not necessarily miss out.
There you have it. And our third type of series of three is the episodic series. And Anne McMahon's going to explain that.
Well, an episodic series is kind of a hybrid of the other two. It will have elements that overarch and carry over from book to book, particularly like individual character arcs, or there might be a big bad a Moriarty type character who weaves in and out through all of the books. But they can be read in any order, even though as authors, I think we really prefer that people start with the first one in every case. But those books can actually be read out of sequence. And the Jericho books are actually episodic in that way.
Okay. All right. So we have those three series, but sometimes it's just not that simple. And Jay is going to explain why.
It may sound as if these three are distinct categories, but I actually think of them more as it's a continuum, and you can mix two types together. As an example, like I write romances, and certain types of series don't work in romance, like an overarching series. If you try to make it a romance series, in book one, the couple would get together in the end. So what would you do for book two? Break them up and then get them back together? That kind of would negate the happy ending book one. If you instead would opt to just follow their happy life as a couple, it would no longer be a romance. It might be an interesting book, but it would not no longer be a romance. By definition, a romance is about how do these two people overcome their conflict, their obstacles to get together. So that type of series wouldn't work. But I sometimes still want to show what happened to these characters. And so for some of my series, I wrote a hybrid between two types of series, like the Oregon series or the Portland Police Bureau series is a hybrid between the overarching series and the loosely connected series, in that the second book still has the same main characters, but they also have a new couple who falls in love in that book, which makes it harder to write because it has 4 main characters, but it still makes it a romance. And so, yeah, you can mix and match the different series types.
Right. Knowing the rules is always helpful, and then breaking the rules is always fun. That's the way I look at it. So we're going to start doing questions in rounds, and it'll be fairly formal. And I promise toward the end, we'll save time for Q&A. So look, we're going to start by asking Anna, what makes writing a series different from writing standalones or unconnected novels?
Yes. So I think basically they fall into 3 kind of categories. The first is that there's going to be, as I think it was Melissa said, sort of an overarching narrative. This can be plot related. It can be theme related. It can be like, for instance, in my series, Love Where You Work, they all have some kind of work conundrum that's going on top of the love that's happening. And then the second category is you're going to get to go deeper into character development, way deeper than you would in one single book. And the third one is generally that they're going to be in the same world. So if it's fantasy, of course, they're going to be in the world you created. If it's more contemporary, you might just have them be in the same city. So those are basically, I think, the 3 sort of distinguishing characteristics. And you can get more into the nitty gritty, but those are sort of the ones that I've teased out.
Okay. And Jay.
For me, it depends on what kind of series you're writing. The loosely connected standalone series will be very similar to writing a standalone, because instead of making up new supporting characters, you bring back main characters from a previous book and make them the supporting characters. So it's not that different from writing a standalone. But if you're writing an overarching series, it will be very different. You will have to do a lot more planning beforehand. You might plan out the entire series. You might even write the entire series before you publish the first book. So maybe a pantser will be struggling a little bit. So, and a hybrid is very different because you have so many main characters, many point of views, many storylines. And yeah, I think a beginning writer might be a little overwhelmed with that type. So yeah, it depends on what series you're writing.
Casey, what would you add to that?
Wow, after Jay? Don't do that again. That's not
okay.
And Jay got it pretty much. But yeah, totally. If you write a standalone, you got to make everything unique. Unique characters, unique place. I do both kinds. I do series and I do standalones. And then, of course, with a series, you kind of have to keep it in the same place, like mine are all in a story, Oregon. So, it depends. They're both fun to write, though. But I agree with Jay, especially, that you have to kind of know what you're going to do for the whole series, or at least have an idea what the whole series is going to be like, or it's very challenging. So pantsers are going to struggle a little bit.
All right, Melissa?
And that's me. I'm a pantser and I'm struggling. I write romance. So from my perspective, one of the things that makes it different than writing an individual book is that I'm juggling couples a little bit. There will be a couple that has its own book and they are at the forefront of the action and the narrative. But once we move on to book 2, we're not saying necessarily goodbye to that main couple. They just no longer have main couple status and they're kind of relegated to secondary. But I still need to keep their world 3-dimensional and alive. And they have a fan base now because book 1's out there and people care about these characters. So I need to make sure that what's going on with them is still important and we're getting glimpses of them and what role can they play in the new story. So while you get through while you get through maybe 4 different books, now you have 4 couples that you're juggling. And so it can be a little bit tricky to keep an eye on everybody. Beyond that, I kind of take a look at how the series are viewed from the reader's perspective. And one of the great things about them is that they're bingeable. We're living in a streaming society where television shows are being dumped on us in their entirety. And there are readers now that will not pick up a series until they're all out because they want to completely consume them. And so that's something that I do keep in mind when I'm writing the books, is that these might all be read all together. And so continuity is going to be key.
Got it. Anne, anything to add?
Yeah. What I think about it from the perspective of the writer and also the reader. I think back to, a billion years ago when I had to work full time, and every day when I got home from work, the first thing I did was take off my shoes and my bra and put on something really, really comfortable. And when I think about going back into a series and rejoining all those people again, it's kind of like that experience for me. I mean, they're people I know. I understand them. I know what they do. I know how they behave. And it's like putting on a garment that you're familiar with. The challenge comes in when you acknowledge that the reader also knows them and is familiar with them and understands how they do and how they behave. So the challenge is to keep those people moving forward on their individual tracks, but still make them unique and interesting and capable of surprising both the reader and me. Mm-hmm. So that's how I think of it. That's what makes it different for me from another book. They have to have maybe even more gravitas than it takes to sustain them in one novel, because we're going to watch them develop and do other things.
Okay, great. You all make writing series sound so appealing, and I haven't done much of it, so I'm going to ask our next question, and why don't we begin with Anne? What do you love about writing a series? Why do you write series? What is it that makes it so appealing that you want to spend your precious energy on it?
Well, I spent like a billion years in therapy, trying to understand myself. So one of the things that I find really appealing about a series, and in my books, I have about 12 million characters, and half of them end up being narrators. They all have different voices and they all have different issues. So for me, what's appealing is actually to watch them work through their stuff, individually and with each other, and see how they behave as they move through environments that present different kinds of challenges. So, I try to parcel them out so that I don't write one after another. I'll write a Jericho book or an Evan Reed novel or something, and then I'll go do something totally different. But when I go back, if I ever write another Jericho book, when I go back to them, it's kind of like picking up all those threads again and seeing what other kinds of patterns it can make with them.
Okay. How about next? Well, I can't go to Jay because then KC won't want to go. So I'm going to make KC go first. Go next.
What do I love about writing a series? Is that the right question?
Yep.
Overall? Okay. And I love Anne's voice and her descriptions and everything, so I get lost in what we're talking about. So
it was kind of, I get that.
Makes it fun. I love writing a series because you get to revisit your characters, definitely. I didn't intend for Darkness Falls to become a series, but I fell in love with those characters so much that I had to keep writing it. So the very next book was a book in that and became a series. But they also, well, I don't want to give that away. I think you're going to ask what's bad about writing a series, so I will not.
That's next.
I will not ruin that. Okay. So I'm just going to say, they're really fun, and I can't wait to do more. How's that?
Okay, that's good. Okay, how about Anna? What do you love about it?
I think for me, probably the biggest draw is that you kind of already have some momentum build up. One of the scariest things that we face is a blank page, right? Like you can't edit a blank page. But when you have either like a world you've created or even some minor characters that you can flesh out, it's not as scary because you're like, okay, I already have something started. So I'm going to use that momentum and kind of build on it. Plus, I do think it's fun to find out where the characters go. I think a lot of the time we might start off with a general idea, but then they just tend to go in a completely different direction, and that can be fun to witness too. So
yeah, I get that. And how about you, Melissa?
I just love that we get to spend so much extra time with them, and that allows me to plot a little bit bigger, a little bit more complicated, because I know that we are going to see these folks later. And if I decide that they're going to have a baby in book 4, that's something in the standalone that we might have glimpsed in the epilogue, or it's an individual book, but we didn't get to like go on that journey and take that ride. And I think Anna touched on this earlier when she said you just get to go deeper with that characterization. And so the reader has the opportunity to really get to know the characters too and become friends with them. And then you have a book that's impactful enough that they want to go ahead and buy the next book too. And then Anne touched on just sitting down and hit the ground running, because I already know this world. I wrote 2 of these books already, and I know this town, and I know that there's a dry cleaner on the corner, and so I can just really focus in on the characters and their interactions because the world is already in place. Now, book 1's a different story, but book 2, 3, and 4, it's really nice to sit down and know where you are right at the beginning.
How about you, Jay?
I mean, basically the same as everyone else said. I like writing longer books, and series are like a really, really long book, which allows me to go deeper into the character development, and to also bring in something that no one else said yet is in a series you can hide little Easter eggs in your books, little references to previous characters or events that aren't necessarily essential to the plot. So if you missed them or you haven't read the previous book, it's no big deal. But a lot of my readers, they will find them. And it's like sharing an inside joke with my readers, and I really enjoy that.
Got it. And so, yes, we're going to flip the coin, and I'm going to have you all say what it is you don't like about series, or perhaps what is your worst nightmare when it comes to writing a series? Like, have you ever been trapped by your own canon, for example, and you have no one to blame but yourself, which is really frustrating. And so how about we start with Melissa on that one?
For me, it's definitely the later books, and finding a way to keep it fresh, not just for the reader, but for myself, because I want to be excited to sit down and write every day. That's when I'm going to do my best work. But a lot of times when, what I was complimenting the series on is I get to sit down and already know the world, but maybe by book 4, I'm really tired of that world and I'm itching for something new, but I want to give those characters what they deserve in a good story. And so that's my biggest struggle. I've done 3 different series now. I did Soho, which was 3 books. I did 7 Shores, which was 4 books. And then Tangle Valley, you'll notice I went back to 3. And there's a reason for that, because on that 4th, 7th Shore book, I really had to pull it out of myself. And it was a character I dearly loved. And so I wanted her to get her story told in an effective manner. And so that's my biggest battle with writing a series.
Okay. And let's see, we're at Melissa. So next must be Anne.
I agree with Melissa. I think one of the challenges when you build a world and you have a series with all these characters, it's you want to put them through things, but you don't want to blow them up either. So it can really be a challenge to figure out what kinds of things can you put into their path, that they're going to have to work their way through the same way we work through things in our own lives. And that's always a challenge. And it's also, I find that bringing new characters in who we haven't met before, who also work as narrators, because they can teach us things about the main characters that we didn't know. So it's really useful to look at everything through these different perspectives. So I think for me, it's keeping it fresh, it's keeping it relevant, and it's, coming up with things that will provide growth experiences for the characters, apart from who was it who mentioned just break them up and put them back together, which we don't really want to do. So that for me is the greatest challenge.
How about Anna? What is it that's the most challenging about writing a series, or that you don't like? You're muted.
Oh, we muted.
Third time's a charm. Yes.
There you go. Yes.
I've definitely written myself into corners before. And one instance was I thought it would be so whimsical to have a character be in a Star Wars on Ice production, which does not exist. But I was like, that sounds like an amazing job. And then the next novel, I was like, fuck, she needs a girlfriend. So like this whole thing had to be created where she was a Star Wars on Ice person. I knew nothing about that. And so I was like, well, I guess I have to learn about ice skating now, which ended up being actually. But I think that's one of the biggest struggles for sure. And also, I think Melissa said, you kind of get bored sometimes being in that same world and working with those same themes. One of the ways I try to get over that is to do completely different tropes. So if I'm doing one trope in one book, I don't touch that one for a couple other books, just to keep yourself from getting, bored or creatively stifled.
Excellent. I'm writing that down. Change tropes was a way to just refresh that book to the middle book problem, etc. So very cool. How about Casey?
Sorry, Jay, you're going to have to always go after me. I called it first. My problem with writing a series really comes down to one and only one thing: disappointing the readers. They have fallen in love with these characters. And I get emails about some of the characters like they think they're real people walking this earth. And so if I have them do something that's not expected or something they think is wrong, it's just a horrible feeling. So I had to be very careful when one of my characters is Taylor. She's a big star of the Darkness series. And she's just the superhero. She's super nice. She has no flaws. But I know if I ever had a flaw, people would probably be like, what have you done to Taylor? Or heaven forbid you kill any of your characters. So you have to be very, very careful with their expectations.
Got it. And Jay?
I think one of the biggest advantages of writing a series is also one of the biggest challenges, which is you're not starting from scratch, which is great. You have the characters, you have the research done, but you're also stuck with everything you said about these characters in this setting before, and you have to be very consistent. You can suddenly, in book 1, you said the brother died. In book 2, we suddenly meet the brother. So you have to remember all of the details or keep track of all the details. You have to keep the tone and the voice of the character the same, while also taking into account that people, of course, are changing over the course of a series. And so especially if you're not a fast writer or it's been a while since you last wrote in that series, you will have to have a lot of rereading to make sure everything is consistent and you meet the right tone and the characterization is really spot on.
Yeah,
I'm jumping on that with definitely having to keep the tone. That's definitely hard with a series. Jake's 100% right. You have to reread some of your books so you make sure they sound the same. That's a tough one too.
Tone is a toughie. And maybe that's why I've always never thought a series was for me, because I hate being trapped and I hate feeling like I have to adhere to. I have to even remember things that happened before. So, but then I write short stories that are follow-ups and it's the same issue. What color eyes does everyone have? And then you realize you never said so in the first book, or you did and you can't find it. But the first reader, that's going to be in their first comment. She made her eyes blue and they were brown.
Yeah.
But so these are the things I fear when I'm, asleep.
Karin, can I share an anecdote that always occurs to me when you think about, particularly with series fiction? It's a Joni Mitchell anecdote.
Oh, absolutely.
And she talked about how for her there was a huge challenge between being a songwriter, being a performer, and being a painter. And she's an excellent painter and a poet. Mm-hmm. And she said the work is different because she thinks about someone like Van Gogh. And she said, nobody ever said to Van Gogh, paint a starry night again, man. But we get that all the time, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
You know, any book I write, it doesn't matter what it is. Inevitably, the one comment I will hear is, there's not enough Maddie and Sid. I want more Maddie and Sid. Can you put more Maddie and Sid? I don't care that they're not in this book. I want to know about them.
Right.
So, you know, there's that issue too that I think we all kind of touched on. So I apologize for busting.
Oh. It was about Joni Mitchell. So, you know. Our next question is about, I think, probably of greatest interest to everyone, where we're going to talk about planning a marketing series and the different, how that's different from standalones. But before we get there, I just want to say to all of the newbie writers out there, or even the oldie writers like me, these panelists are really good at what they do. They didn't start this way. They started off with one book and they learned lessons, and they wrote another book and they learned lessons. The magic bullet there is they continue to write more books, but don't think that you have to have this masterful master plan going in and that you're going to get it all right, and because you're going to not. You can be imperfect. And in fact, that's exactly what's going to happen. So just giving everyone permission to not be perfect, but write the books, because without that, you don't have anything. So the most important thing is to get it written. So we're going to talk now about the magic question: our series a secret weapon for making a living as a writer? That would be, are they more lucrative? Is one type of series more lucrative? One type of series more easy to manage? Is the income steadier, or do you have to wait forever to really pay off in the final end of it? So let's start with the little roulette wheel is going around in my mind, and the ball is dropping on Casey.
I was ready for you. Look,
okay.
So writing a series it is more lucrative if you write them pretty close together, because you get something called read through, where if you have a book come out and people are like, oh, I love this author and this is a new book, but this is not the first one, I guess I'll go start at the beginning. And the longer your series, the more you're going to make, because every book counts. But it really makes it really works if you write them fast. So like someone said, maybe write them all ahead of time and then release them every couple of months would work, because that's when Amazon will kind of kick you out of the ranking. So yeah, it is a good bullet to use, but I wouldn't say that if you aren't going to do it fast, it's the only way to be successful. I think writing a good book, standalone book, will also make you successful as long as you market it correctly. So both. The answer is both. That was easier.
George R.R. Martin doesn't exactly crank them out. We're talking years between.
He gets read through, let me tell you. That guy
and he gets read through. Exactly. Exactly. How about you, Anna?
I love the magic bullet question. I'm such a sucker for it. If there's ever a blog post that's like, this is the secret to writing, I am clicking on it, even though I know that there is none. So it's very compelling. It doesn't exist, as you said. There's no magic bullet, or to paraphrase you, perseverance is the magic bullet. The more you put your work out there, the more you take rejection and failure and learn from it, the more books you put out, the better you're going to get, the bigger your fan base is going to be. So that's the real secret weapon. But having said that, I will say that writing a series has been very beneficial to growing and building a fan base. So if you're self-publishing, indie publishing, you can make your first book either perma-free, or you can make it 99 cents, very cheap, as this sort of lowering gate so that other people will get invested and read your series. And I've had thousands of people sign up for my newsletter just based on that one book alone. So I think that is really helpful if you can swing it. So yeah, that's probably my big advice there. It's like, use it to build up your fans, use it to learn, use it to cultivate your skills as a writer. Listen to readers, listen to feedback, listen to other authors. They usually have really good tales from the trenches, as all of us can tell you. Yeah, and don't give up. Keep going.
Absolutely. How about you, Jay?
my favorite answer to almost any question is always, it depends. Whether or not a series contributes to your success depends on so many things, among them, what do you write? What genre do you write? And I think generally it's a good idea to spread a wide net when you are learning, and marketing is part of what an author needs to learn, and business decisions. But if you follow all the publishing gurus, they will all tell you series are the key to success, especially if you're writing romance, write a series. But the thing is that most of these publishing experts, first half of them are not really experts, and the other half, they write mainstream romances, meaning straight romances. And that is a genre that works very differently from sapphic romances, actually. Maybe not the books themselves, but the market is very different. I'm not just a word person, I'm very much also statistics and numbers person. And what I've been doing for at least 5 years is look at the top 100 on Amazon every fall and compare what is sapphic romance doing, what is gay romance, meaning MM romance doing, and what is straight romance doing. And gay romance and straight romance, they are dominated by series books. About 80% or more are series. So it makes sense for a straight person or someone who is writing a straight romance to write a series. Sapphic romance looks a lot different. There's like a 50-50 split. 50% of the books in the top 100 will be part of a series, and the other 50% are standalones. And that brings me back to my initial answer, it depends. So you can be very successful with a series, and you can be very successful with a standalone, or you, as I always do it, I start out with a standalone and then later develop it into a series because a supporting character captures my interest. So there are many ways to have a successful career, and series can be a part of it. But if you absolutely hate series, it's not an absolute requirement.
Okay. And Anne, where do you fall on that question?
I fall into it wanting to sit with all of you in the lunchroom, because
I know, right?
Yeah, I'm like the Luddite here. I do none of these things, much to the chagrin of my publisher. It takes me generally about 18 months to write, particularly a Jericho book, because they're dense and have 8 million characters. So I can't put them out quickly. They're usually a couple years apart. And I found in my experience that the fact that I have written a chunky series like that and then a shorter mystery series does kind of anchor me and give me sort of a good backlist, as something I can point to. But in my experience, the successive books in a series always sell a little less than the flagship. And I don't know if you all have that same experience.
Yeah.
But like certainly with the Jericho books, I mean, in my life, Jericho fell from heaven on stone tablets, and every book that I've written after that, which I actually think as a writer are better books, sell a little bit less. But they're weird because they still function as a unit and they kind of move ahead, as a group. So, they sort of work as a group, but I wish I did have the experience you all have. And my idea of marketing, I'm going to be real honest with you, and you might want to get a pen and write this down because I mean this sincerely. When I have a question about how to effectively market a book, I steal liberally from Jay and Melissa Brayden.
Yeah, that's the smart move.
Good advice right there.
I'm just going to, yeah, we all do. And now I've lost track. I'm so amused by that.
I think I'm left.
You're left. That's right, Melissa. And I also wonder if you could mention the difference between writing a series and branding. Because sometimes, especially in romance series, in mainstream, it feels like the branding of the author is being marketed as if it were a series. It's another type of romance, but it's not the legit, separately titled series. So Sorry, if that's a curveball, you can just skip it.
No, I'll tackle one than the other if I can. But to Anne's point, I think what she is describing, that attrition rate from book one and then readers falling off to book two and then readers falling off even more in book three, that's pretty universal for any series. Your book one is always going to sell better than book four. That's just part of it. That means book one needs to be really good. You need to put your best foot forward with book one because you want to hold on to those readers and at least get them on to book two, if not book three. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And what Jay was saying about it, it also just depends on the series in particular. I have three, and one of my series, Soho, outsells the other two by a lot. And so if I'm looking at making money, I could look at that series and say, oh yes, series is the way to go. But if I look at the other two, I think I have some individual books that sell much better than those other two series. So it just really has to do with how the series hits with the audience, because you can't say across the board, series are always going to sell better. They're not. Some will and some won't. So it depends on how it's received. And in terms of branding, we talked earlier about an overarching plot. If you can have overarching themes of either your title, your cover, your marketing, your color scheme, anything that ties those books together, when a reader is out there and sees one of the books in the wild and they can say, oh, that's a Seven Shores book because it has the word like in the title. I did, Love Like This, Eyes Like Those, Sparks Like Ours. And I wanted them to be identifiable, not just by the covers, which we're all designed together, but also by that little tweak to the title that was a nod to, this is part of a series. Don't you recognize it? But I'll let the others speak to branding. I don't want to go too far.
Well, and I want to just ask if anybody has a feeling for the drop off from first book. Would that be true of an epic series where you have to read them in order? Would book three perhaps be the payoff book, because there are people who will not start until they can binge them all? Jay?
If you have an overarching series, there will be a very high read-through. At least for mine, it's that way. Like the Oregon series has a pretty high read-through because you have to. I mean, you could, but you should really start with the first book and then read the others. So there, the read-through is pretty high. But if you have a very loosely connected series like my Hollywood series, sometimes it even happens, in that case, the second book is the bestseller, not the first one, because it's a really loose connection. So the read-through is not as tight as with the strongly connected series. The stronger the connection between the books, the more compelling it is for readers to go on and read the next one. If it has the same characters, they will be more likely to read on. If it has new main characters, then it depends. Did the main characters from the next book make an appearance in this book? Did they have only a small appearance or a stronger role? So then it will vary a little more.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add on that general idea? Sure, Anne?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Anne.
One of the things I've noticed is if you try to track audiobook sales, those don't behave like books. Have you all noticed that?
Yes, they don't.
Yeah, particularly with the series. It might be like the third or fourth book in the series is the one that really just, I mean, and the one thing that I do know for sure is, at least in my case, it's really helpful to have the same narrator do all of the books, for the same reasons we identified about why we write series fiction, because we know them and we know their voices. Well, then the narrator also knows their voices. So, but I did find that audiobooks really are kind of outliers when it comes to how things sell.
And that could be just because of factors beyond your control, like that fourth book, for whatever reason, Audible put on sale multiple times or pushed, and yet you can't guess what they're going to do. That's in a black box, and it just happens. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think on the question mark, and we have a lot of questions in the the Q&A box, and I think we've touched on many of them. But there was one, where is it, that we're going to get to. But on marketing, we've talked a lot, I think, especially around romance, but I wondered specifically, Casey, you write spec fic and science fiction and other series that outside of romance. Do you see a difference in the way they behave between the two genres? Accepting, of course, that romance, of course, is always going to sell more. That's just the nature of the beast.
Not necessarily for me.
Not necessarily? All right.
Darkness series, although it has romantic elements, is spec fic. It's not going to fall within the same boundaries that romance books. I do have a romance series. It does okay. I also have an erotica series. I have a science fiction series too, but I have more established the others, which is erotica series, Lesbian Billionaires, Welcome to Rubies and Darkness. And I have to say that it goes in darkness, rubies, and the erotica. Definitely. So, yes, okay. You can't always say romance, not necessarily.
All right. Other thoughts, Jay?
To add to what Casey said, it also depends on what your branding. If Casey branded herself as a speculative fiction writer, then she has built that audience, and so that's why those series will sell well. And when she switches to a different genre, of course, she might not have built that audience yet. So for me, I write across pretty much all subgenres of romance. For me, it's the contemporary romances who sell best by far, and I think that's a general trend. And then maybe followed by the historical romances, and then followed by the paranormal romances.
If I could make one point too, back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of making a living and how series can factor into that. When you have a series, it's a lot more attractive to somebody who's looking to adapt it into other mediums. For example, I had a series that got sold into a video game, a choose your own adventure app. Like, they bought the series of books because there was a lot of content there for them to use. I also had one of the series optioned by the Mark Gordon Company, looking to make a TV show out of it. It didn't actually happen, but I got that option money. And the series is a more attractive purchase because there's so much content that you're getting bang for your buck. And look at Bridgerton, for example, on Netflix. There were a lot of books, so they have a lot of seasons to build from. And so when they purchased that, it was going to be more eye-catching to them than only having an individual book that could provide them one series.
Okay.
Can I mention one last thing? Well, like I ever have a last thing. But, when you think about marketing and branding for series, I have heard that it can be really helpful to get a good cover designer. I'm just putting it
I know one.
Yeah, we all know one. But cover continuity ends up being really, really important. It's I don't think you can overstate how crucial it is. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. Before I ask my last question, which is a bit of a surprise, and it came up though in the Q&A, Anna, did you have anything to ask to the discussion around making a living? You kind of started us off, and we wandered a bit.
I started us off, right? So I think.
Okay. Well, the last question, and it came up in the Q&A, is how. And Melissa alluded to it. How do you keep it fresh? However, I think the flip of that is, how do you know when it's time to say goodbye? It's time to wrap one up. And is that an emotional decision? Is it a financial decision? Does it depend? Guess Code J, I took that already. It depends. So let's start with Anna.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it depends. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule where it's like, oh, we've reached book 3, so now you have to finish. It's sort of like, is the story over? Are you really struggling to make this work and it's not working anymore? Are you just tired of being in that world? Do you have other story ideas kicking around in your brain? So any and all those questions, I think, are going to impact where you end up stopping your story. I'm still kind of figuring that out right now. I'm working on book 4 in my series, and I took a break from it because I did get really bored, but I'm like, okay, I think I could probably do a few more now. So it might just be taking a break, getting another book out of you that has more interest to you, and then seeing what happens down the road.
Yeah, the life changes, the world changes, and suddenly that series goes pop. I have something that would fit right into it. I've know of a couple of people who suddenly realized they had a book 4, and it was years from book 3. How about Anne? Anything on the, how do you know when it's done?
I thought it was done. Yeah, but the thing that terrifies, I'll talk about what terrifies me the most, okay, is I think a lot of times we think it's done. We understand, that it's done, that we've taken it, and what you don't want to do is you don't want to do like, the Frasier reboot, or bring Murphy Brown back, or you don't want to try to shove out, another book in the series just because people are clamoring for it. I mean, I think that you have to have enough sense and understanding to realize that it's done. They've done their thing. They've finished. They've said what they have to say, and I think it can be really difficult to own that and not to want to keep going back to that. Well, for all the reasons we all identified that dovetail with why we like to write them in the first place. Because they're known. It's like knowing when to leave is the hardest thing to do.
Right. And how about you, Casey? When do you know it's time to stick a fork in it?
Well, I'm a huge planner, excuse me. So I already know. On the Ruby series, it's 4 books. I have 1 book left to write. The series is 7 books.
I'm refraining from calling you a bad word.
The Darkness series is the only Rogue series. I wrote it as a standalone first book that became a trilogy. Then I kept going. My cat's going to touch the keyboard, so hold on a second here. I might disappear. I apologize. But yeah, I already know in advance which ones are going to die when.
And how about you, Jay?
I mean, there's 2 situations. Either it's an overarching story with a certain plot, an adventure or quest or whatever mostly it's an external plot, and that always has a natural endpoint. So when the story is told, it's told, the series is over. I think the harder decisions are either the episodic or the interconnected series where theoretically you could continue forever. And I think for me, the point to stop would be either when I lose interest or when the reader loses interest. And I would notice readers losing interest if the book no longer sells, or the series no longer sells, or doesn't sell enough to sustain a living. Personally, I don't write a book if I don't feel passionate about it. I work so long on doing research, writing the book, rewriting the book, editing a book, and then I translate it into German, so that makes it even longer. And if I don't want to write a book, I think readers will notice it. So as much as, let's say backwards to Oregon, I had hundreds of emails when I first published it, and people begging me for a sequel. And I was convinced the story was told, there will be no sequel. And I wasn't planning on making it a series. For me, the story was told. And it took me a year, then I reread it and I was like, what was I thinking? That story is not over. And then I realized there's so many unanswered questions, but it took me a year where I was convinced that it wouldn't be a second book. But only when I saw the potential, I started to make it a series. So I think I learned to never say never, but to also not just say yes just because readers want a second book. If I don't see the potential, I'm going to write something else and then maybe later circle back to it and see if I see the potential.
And Jay, thank you, Jay, for continuing that series.
Yes, we're all grateful.
Thousands of other people who would feel the same. So thank you very much.
And how about you, Melissa?
I come from a show business background, so I always believe leave them wanting more. If I direct a show, I don't want the audience to walk out of the theater and the first thing they say is, that was long. that would be horrific for me. And so this is another form of show business in a way. And so I would much rather have people clamoring, asking, begging for another book, because that creates buzz on its own even, than them getting kind of bored and just not finishing the series. That would break my heart. So I, similar to Jay, I also have to have passion for it. I also have to be invested, and I know that I will lose interest after 3 or 4 books. So that's usually going to be my number, because I know that about myself, but also I want to leave them wanting more.
All right. I think that's a good philosophy. I'm just going to look at our time. We are right with 5 minutes at the hour. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A box. And we've actually spoken around and addressed many of them. I hope that the people who asked those questions got their answer in the long run. But one of them, it has to do with the tools. What do you do to keep track of those details, every little detail, character names, the names of their siblings, and all of that? I've heard people mention a series Bible. What's that? Who'd like to tackle that?
I guess I can. A series Bible is something that I should keep. It is a document you can use it in a Scrivener. You can have, some people have hard copies, like an actual Bible, and that's where they just annotate every little detail about the town and the connections and the eye colors. And so when they get to a new book, they use it to refresh their memory about the world that they're going to go into. Now, I am lucky. One thing I was blessed with was a really good memory. And so for my series, I just relied on what I remembered about the world, and I'm pretty good at that. But I had a humbling experience recently, which might change my whole philosophy. Now, I wrote The Last Lavender Sister, followed by Marigold. I didn't go into it thinking it was a series. It's only 2 books, but it operates similar to a series. And that in the first book, the main character's ex-girlfriend, Nora, breaks up the characters at a certain portion in the book. And then I went on and wrote Marigold, and I had those same characters decide to name their baby Nora. Now, we caught this right before that book went to press. It was a stop the presses moment. There was a divine intervention. Somebody wrote on my TikTok video something about that evil Nora from Last Lavender. And I went, evil Nora? That's the baby. Why would that be? And it hit me, and I got on the phone, and they stopped the presses. And we made the change. And so it had to be the same number of letters for typefacing. Now you'll notice that baby is now named Kara, not Nora.
Oh,
so I will now use a Bible, everybody.
Well, I have to say, I used to have an excellent memory. And, I'm still struggling to remember the order of your names. So, it really, as life changes us, we lose some of our essential talent. And a good memory is one of those things. Let me see if there's another question before we're just about at our hour, but I want to make sure. This was from early on. How receptive are publishers to a series? If you're a brand new writer, do you think going in with a series gives you a better edge, or are publishers not willing to take that leap with a new writer? How about Anne?
I think it depends on how good the first book is. Honest to goodness. I mean, if someone comes in with a book that's great, there's nothing that's, and you know this, Karin, there's nothing that's more music to your ears than for them to say, yeah, this is book 1 of a 12-part series. And you're like, yes, fine, here it is. What's your name? So no, I mean, I think if you go in with an idea for a series, it might be a harder sell. But I mean, if you've done the diligence and you've got a really great first novel and you take it in and you introduce it as part of the series, I think you're going to get a really warm reception from most publishers.
Yeah. I tend to agree with that. It really depends on in some cases, it's not even a great first book. It's a great first 2 pages. Sorry if I'm breaking anyone's heart, but decisions are sometimes made that quickly. So the first 2 pages of your 12-part series may be the one. That's how you get it sold. That's how you get the publisher to read page 3 and then page 4. And I guarantee you, if you read the first chapter and you can't stop reading as a publisher, you've already got them half most of the way interested in you.
Well, or if you're Fonnie Willis, it could be the first 2 pages of a deposition that get you.
Yeah, you just don't bury the lead. Make the good stuff right up front. Let's see. We talked about that. We talked social. I think we addressed that one. How do you know when it's time? Minor characters. Would it be a series? I think this is a technical question, and whoever feels comfortable, jump in. Is it considered a series when a minor character gets their own story, but no one from the previous books in the series appear in the book? I think thinking that through.
I would say probably yes. But, that would be like a loosely connected series.
Like the town is the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know those exist. I can't think of one off the top of my head where it's all set in the same town, but the characters have almost no connections between them. But if they've really planned it, and I cannot think of the name of it, if you read them all in any order, it doesn't matter. You have a complete epic because each person is told a piece of the story, but they're not interrelated. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Each book is a piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And only at the end do you see all the pieces. And I can't remember the name of it. It wasn't sapphic. Yeah. So there we have it. The memory goes. I have no estrogen. And how about this for a last question, going back to marketing? It's the last one in the Q&A box. Marketing is a learning process. What would you say is your number one go-to for marketing, your must-do to market a series? Jay?
As with all marketing, the most important thing is to build your newsletter and not rely on social media. We've seen this week alone, the Lesbian Review lost their Facebook group. Twitter is going belly up. So writing and marketing is both a marathon, not a sprint. So there's no magic bullet, there's no quick solve, nothing will make you an instant bestseller. So build your newsletter, build your website, and build a connection with your readers, and quality writing, quality covers. And that's true for standalones and for series.
Yeah. Anyone have anything to add on that?
I would say don't be afraid to, I don't want to say overmarket. I'm so careful. Like, I already posted about that book last month. And they say like a reader almost has to see a book that they're interested in already, advertise to them about 7 times to then push them over to make the leap to buy. And I'm like, well, I'm not hitting 7 times. That's something that I need to work on. So for me, the advice I give myself is I need to be a little bit more robust, whether it's the newsletter or the website, but in pushing it out there more in terms of marketing. And, we have publishers, most of us, but we're still independent contractors left to do our own marketing as well. Like, they're doing their job, but I got to do my job too.
Anyone else on that one? Your go-to?
I totally agree. I think we tend to undermarket ourselves, especially as women or, non-binary folks. We struggle to put ourselves out there. And I do too. Like, when my book comes out, I'm like, okay, I'll write 1 email, and it's like, 15 emails, like 30 social, like, you have to really just do it, because as Melissa said, like, people aren't, especially if it's on social media, like a fraction of your audience is getting that. So the more you do it, the more it has a chance to catch. I would also say to, like, don't hesitate to experiment. Do things that you might not necessarily think would work. They might lead to a connection. They might lead to 1 new fan. They might lead to 100. But if you're doing the same thing over and you're not catching anything, try something else, and don't be afraid to get weird with it. Find Reddit groups that specialize in whatever you're working on. Look for occasional discount or freebie groups. Jay's newsletter is awesome. Like, sign up for that. Like, so just keep experimenting and keep sort of pushing yourself to get out of that comfort zone when it comes to marketing.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Yeah, I've always found it's very difficult to take off the writer hat and your baby, and you're looking at your books as they're your babies. And it's like showing people your kid pictures, and their interest in that wanes quickly, as anyone with children knows about the third picture. The person who's seen those 3 pictures doesn't need to see more. But a lot of people miss the first 3 pictures. And on Facebook, I've done a couple of A/B sort of tests with posting, and there's no way to predict whether what you post, like your book cover or a meme panel that talks about the elements of the book, is if that's going to be broadly seen or not. I can't figure out if it's time of day or it's the amount of content. It does seem to matter to put the links not in the main body, but in the comments, because Facebook doesn't want anyone to ever leave Facebook. Same thing with all social media platforms. But marketing is just something you have to make yourself do. And we all hate it. It's okay to hate it. And avoid comparing yourself to other people. That's thinking that, oh, look, so-and-so's, Melissa, their posts are so cute, and I just can't do that. Well, get rid of that demon, and that's making you not do anything. Be yourself. Be authentic is always great advice. Talk about what you love and what you're passionate about. And then people will figure out that you're passionate about your books. So I think we may be at the end of our session. We ran a little long, but I don't think anyone's going to regret that. I'd like to, before I ask everybody that one final go, to say a huge thank you to Crystal Cognot, who has run the GCLS virtual series now, I believe, since its inception. And this is her final event that she's putting together. Turn your camera on, Christelle, and wave. Please light up the chat with thanks for Christelle. Yay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
She says goodbye and she's happy. And there's just the nature of volunteer work. You miss it like crazy, but sometimes it just feels really good to take a break. So before we go, I just want to ask everyone, we'll go in alpha order by first name. What's your next release? And what's your favorite series, or that thing that you just reread or rewatch because that series just works for you? So we'll start off with Anne.
I'll start with my favorite series, Patricia Highsmith's Ripley books, starting with The Talented Mr. Ripley. I love those books, and I think I really love them because she wrote about an anti-hero who we all care about. So I find those mesmerizing. My next book, which I just finished writing after a month in Vermont by myself, is called, here it is. Well, it's called, you can't see it. My thing's blocking it.
There we go.
It's called The Blackbird of Chernobyl. And it's a romantic comedy about a mortician.
Like you do.
The world has been waiting for this book. I'm happy to bring it to you.
Okay. And how about you? How about you, Anna?
I'm working on, as I said, book 4 in the Love Where We Work series. So super excited about that. I am also, with my agent, I'm working on pitching a book that I wrote like before the pandemic started. So it has been around for a long time. Could potentially be a series, but I'm not sure. I've actually heard different things about that from agents and publishers about what they want. And the series that I just got into is, I actually have it here. It's this amazing, like epic fantasy involving not like medieval Europe, which was a big hindrance to me. And it's super queer and super fun. And it's by a Native American author, which I love. So book 2 just came out. So we'll see about that.
Okay, cool. And how about you, Jay?
I'll start with one of my favorites as a reader is by A.J. Noyes, Ask Tell, which is an interesting mix of the different types of series. She has a sequel that follows the same characters and more of a spin-off about the sister, and then one that is parallel to the first book from the point of view of the other main character. So really interesting mix. And my next release will be a medical romance or medical rom-com with an ice cream character, and the title is Bachelorette Number 12, and it will be out in January, and I can't wait.
Great. Okay, Casey, you had to follow Jay for that one.
Yeah, I alphabetically couldn't get out of it. I'll give her more props because it's her series that I absolutely love the most. Actually, one of the reasons I really got into writing. So Backwards to Oregon is definitely a read if you haven't read it already. I don't think there's anybody out there who hasn't read it, but give a look if you haven't. My next book is actually going on pre-order on Monday and comes out on December 4th. It is called Storm in Her Heart, and I actually have a copy here, if I can hold it up the right way. There you go. So yeah, take a look for that. And it's about, it's an action adventure romance again, kind of, I've done a couple of those and they've done well. But yeah, take a look for that coming out soon.
Okay. And last, never least, Melissa.
I have You Had Me at Merlot coming out in February. And when I was thinking, there were so many series and I'm not going to be able to fit them all in. I've already mentioned Alley Valley's Devil series. I love Radcliffe's Honor series, Georgia Beer's Puppy Love series, and KG McGregor's Shaken series. So
yes.
There's a few for you all to check out. Now, Jericho, I remember seeing Anne McMan at an event before we were friends, and I wanted to go up to her, and I was so nervous. I'd already read it, and now we're friends, which is so awesome. But I was nervous because I was fangirling on her for Jericho. So.
My life is now complete.
It's true. In Austin, Texas. Yeah.
I remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we went a little long. I'm looking at the clock, 10 minutes over, but thank you, everyone. Thank you all people who are attending. We love that. This is going to appear on YouTube in short order. It'll be up. And everyone who has been here with us, if you see the post announcing that it's available, please share that so that people who weren't here or forgot or life happened to them, they get a shot at remembering that there's some really valuable information for them to learn here. So thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, panelists. You were all awesome. I knew you would be. And we'll see you at the next virtual series event, whenever that happens.